It's been really hot here in Ontario
radiators-
for like the past ever. Yesterday, I decided it would be a brilliant idea in all the humidity that it was to run 11 kilometers because I've been running 11 kilometers.
Nice.
But I've been doing that like every or 3 times a week, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll do it again tomorrow. But like for some reason, yesterday after I finished running, I was like, my body wants to divorce the rest of my body.
Yeah.
Welcome. You are entering into a strange dimension. A dimension where narratives from across space and time come together. Narratives that could have, might have, or should have been all exist here in one space. This is CineMasters Ultimate Timeline.
Hello, and welcome to CineMasters, the show where we watch movies and talk about them and repitch them as hopefully better movies. I am Nate Draper, and I am joined as always by my very good friend, Andrew DeYoung.
What's going on, guys?
All the way from opposite, well, not quite opposite sides of Canada, like Vancouver to Toronto, almost.
If we were in the States, it would be like East Coast to West Coast, but because Canada like flares out at the top.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like
exactly.
Central Canada, which is like East Coast United States, but not East Coast Canada.
Yeah, exactly. It's often, even out here, it's referred to as East Coast. Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, I mean, like it's just sort of like, or like back out east.
Yeah.
When it is still kind of like central. I mean, it is east from here, I suppose. But
That's funny because when we say east, we mean like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and usually, if people hear if someone refers to back out east, they're usually referring to Toronto because there's a lot of people here who are actually from Toronto. Who
doesn't
move
surprise
here
me.
and then love the mountains and stay.
And love the my mom has told me this. She's like, if you wind up moving to BC for whatever reason, you are never going to move back. And I have to say, like, I said the same thing about New Zealand. As like, if I go back to New Zealand and for whatever reason, like for holiday, I don't think I'll come back. Like, it's just be like, I'm going to go to New Zealand for a week. Just never come back.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. People said the same thing about me when I moved here. Before I moved here, I said I'm moving to Vancouver, and they said, "Okay, well, you'll probably just stay there."
You'll probably just stay there. I mean, you've also been able to find yourself like the film industry, which has been largely about that. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It just actually, even just logistically, it worked out because I've been able to kind of establish a career here. And it's, in Canada, it is between here and Toronto. They're both the places to be. So
I never see anything happening in Toronto, but
it's usually happening like downtown, like in like metropolitan Toronto. There's also a lot of like editing and visual effects work that's done in Toronto as well.
Okay.
Yeah. And then in terms of like, although actually like there have been some big movies that have been shot in like Georgetown. I don't know. Andrew CineCasters? No, Scottsdale Farm.
Yeah.
Scottsdale. Yeah, they've shot some movies there.
Oh wow. I do know that they shot like the Santa Claus. The first Santa Claus movie was shot in Oakville. Right. Like two or three houses down from where my cousins grew up.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So the very nice neighborhood right by the shore in Oakville.
Yep. But speaking of the film industry, today we're talking about The Last Samurai. Before we start going all about the film industry and how that works out, we're talking about The Last Samurai. And I have a love-hate relationship with this movie.
Yeah, I remember you saying that you had wanted to do it because you picked this, right?
Yeah, I was like, I think we should finally get around to doing The Last Samurai, which I both was looking forward to, but also was dreading because, like, full disclosure, this is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Really?
I fucking love this movie so much, but it's just a tiny little bit racist. And
yes, I get where you're coming from with that.
It's just basically tiny little bit racist because it's the white savior complex. But on top of that, it's also like, I think it's an over-idealized version of like the way Westerners view the Japanese. And I think you could get away with that. You could get away with that if the whole thing was just like a narrated version from Nathan's perspective, but because it's told from a third person perspective, it becomes like, oh, I feel like this is a Westerner's interpretation of what was happening.
Yeah, I agree with you in that it does. I would be curious to read, and I did a little bit. Unfortunately, I didn't really have time to do as much research as I would have liked to, because I realized that this is actually, there is some elements of a real story, but the Nathan character was purely an invention from what I can tell. And so it's, yeah, and I agree. It's sort of, it's kind of odd to tell, from my perspective at least, to tell the story of samurais in Japan and transition from traditional to modern through this, through this character.
Well, that's interesting because the Nathan character, Nathan Algren, it's weird. All of the characters in the show are really actually based, especially the main characters, are based on real people, real individuals. Mm-hmm. So Nathan Algren was actually not an American. He's based on a French military strategist who was apparently brought in by the Japanese Imperial Army. And then Mr. Omura is an actual. Mr. Omura was an actual person. Whether the character is just a facsimile of him or whatnot, but that he's an actual person who was like, for the industrialization and westernization of Japan. And then Katsumoto wasn't his name, but there was a guy who was and basically was Katsumoto, but he pushed back against the emperor. But he fought. He actually was for the westernization of it. This is what I mean when I say it's idealized, the movie, because it's much more nuanced than that. Like when Nathan shows up and is all like, oh, the samurai, and I feel peace here, and everything is so beautiful and everything is so perfect. It's like, yeah, I guess, but Katsumoto also wasn't or the person he's based off of wasn't just like this traditionalist samurai who was like, oh, the samurai way is the only way and it's the best way. He was pro-westernization. He didn't want to see Japan lose its history, and didn't want to see it so aggressively become westernized. You know what I mean? So some of the rules in the show, or in the movie that were depicted, like the thing about not being allowed to wear a top knot, the person whose Katsumoto is based off of was against that. He was like, why are we telling people that they can't wear top knots? Why are we telling people that they can't have swords in public? Why are we... He was basically like, why are we trying to move away from what makes Japan Japan in an attempt to become overly Western? And he did this on the basis of tradition, but he also did it on the basis of power. But he also did it on the basis of, he thought that other Western countries' influence was actually putting those countries, or putting Japan at risk of becoming exploited by those countries.
Right.
Particularly America, the French, the Brits, because after Japan went through an era of isolation. They isolated themselves, and then the Americans, the only people they were allowed to trade with were the Portuguese and the Dutch, and only out of 2 cities. So the Portuguese and the Dutch were only allowed to go to those 2 cities.
Interesting.
And so that's where they got all their Western information. And then the United States showed up. This is an oversimplification, but the United States showed up and they were like, hey, stop being isolated. And Japan was like, let us think about it. And the States showed up with a bunch of, an armada with a huge amount of guns and whatnot and cannons, and was like, no, stop being isolated. And Japan was like, oh, hey, yeah, we're not isolated anymore. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden it became this oh, we're going to be Western now. And I think there was some pushback. And I do think they went a little bit into this, and I'll stop ranting in a second. But I do think they went into a little bit of this when they said, one of the generals that Nathan is training is samurai. And there were many samurai who, gave up their sword to become more westernized in the way that we see in the movie, but I do think there was it was far more to Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
Where where the guy who, I wish I knew his name, but the guy who Katsumoto was based off of wasn't just anti-westernization, but he was, and pro-samurai, but he was, let's keep our values, our traditions. And even then, I'll get into it when I get into my pitch, but even then, he had some ways of thinking that, you know, when I talk about him this way, it's like, oh, like this sounds really reasonable, and why didn't the emperor do that? But he was also in power of, or he didn't like the idea of all men being equal.
Oh.
He thought, he had his reasons, but he thought that that the samurai and the class structure that the feudal Japan and the samurai lords had was a good system, and becoming more Western meant that all men were equal. And that he would lose some of his political power, and part of it was like he didn't like the way that soldiers were now being viewed as lesser. Like soldiers were now, whereas in Japan, you know, the samurai, the warriors was like this class of people that held a lot of respect. Even, and I may be wrong about this, but even the Ronin, those who were samurai who fought without a master. They were treated poorly because of their social status. They were swords for hire, and they were basically like stray dogs, the way we might treat them. But they still had a respect. They were warriors. There was a respect to it. And I think he saw this as losing his power politically.
Interesting.
Yeah. See, that's what I mean when I say like this movie is so great, but also way too simplified.
Yeah, actually, so that's great. I'm actually really glad you brought that background to it, because I did like some quick reading on it, and you captured a lot more of what I was only able to sort of get on the surface of. But yes, that's actually one thing that I felt watching it. I was going, I feel like this is a really massive oversimplification and a really, idealized view of traditional versus modern values. And if you were to actually go back in time and look at it, you would see something that's very different. And I was curious how much of this, like, this fascination with samurai culture in terms of how it's presented in the movie is actually accurate to the lifestyle of samurai. And my gut was like, this is probably way too, like, romanticized.
Yeah, I think it is very romanticized. That's one of my big things. The other one is like the whole white savior thing. The fact that this is sort of Katsumoto's story told from Nathan, and I think this could work, and I tried to do it in my pitch a bit, but the biggest issue that I have is that the story should be about Katsumoto like fighting for what he believes in, and it should be that the samurai way of life saves Nathan, not Nathan saves the samurai. Yeah, okay. That's a good point. It's kind of in there, like with his whole like alcoholism and so he and he learns peace through learning the samurai way, where he can still be a warrior, but it becomes much less about fighting and much more about the peace of mind, the discipline. And they talk a little bit about that, but I think they should push that harder and be like, hey, it can't be. Because in the end, Nathan gives the sword to the Emperor, Katsumoto's sword, and you're like, symbolically this works, because Nathan, the character we've been following, is telling the story of Katsumoto, and when he gives the sword to the Emperor, it's like, narratively this works. But unfortunately, in terms of white savior, what this scene implies, that scene in particular implies, is that Nathan has this important narrative placement that means that it's basically white savior. Like he's like, oh, here's Katsumoto's sword that I'm delivering to you, and I'm the delivery method of Katsumoto's message. But that says a lot about white savior. And I think you've hit it on the head right there. My other critiques on it have to do with, I think it's a little heavy-handed. I mean, this is going back to the oversimplification, but the whole, like, at the beginning, he has PTSD. Yeah.
Like, there's no, like, just the way in which it's, and this is not necessarily meant to be a critique on Tom Cruise's performance. I think it's a combination of elements in terms of how it's done, but it's like, just trying to, like, shove it in your face, like, he has PTSD, and he's an alcoholic. And my experience with people who've fought in wars and have PTSD, the alcohol use is a way that they can actually basically deal with deal with the stress so that they can function. And whereas in this case, it's like, oh, he's angry and he's an alcoholic. And it's just like the Hollywood image of this is what PTSD looks like. Whereas the people who I've met who are like former soldiers who have fought in wars, they try to hide it. They don't display it.
Yeah. And it's much more about becoming functional as opposed to becoming sloshed.
Yeah, exactly. And I felt like, and that's why, I mean, it's like a little heavy-handed. And then again, when it's like, when he's in the samurai village, he's, it's like, oh, now he's learned how to be one with nature, and his PTSD and alcoholism is just gone.
It's just gone, yeah. I really do. Yeah, that is kind of heavy-handed. I do think that the idea, I think, is there a lot of time has passed. Mm-hmm. But they do that through journaling. But I actually think that the best part of this movie is when he's in the samurai village.
Yeah, I agree. My favorite scene in the movie, the scene that I think is actually really interesting, is when he's sitting down to have dinner with the family after having just learned that he killed their father.
Yeah.
And now he's got and I'm like, oh, that's a cool scene. Like, that's a great, there's so much tension there.
And there's a lot between, like, when he discovers it, there's a lot of, like, interpersonal kind of messed upness where he's, like, sitting with these two kids and Katsumoto's son, Nobutada, and Taka, and like, so these two kids are, like, well, the youngest doesn't understand, I don't think. The older one does understand. Nobutada understands that this is a guy who killed his uncle,
I guess.
Yeah. And because I think Taka is supposed to be his aunt. Mm-hmm. And Taka is like, I have to look after this dude who killed my husband. Like, WTF?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that brings me to my last grievance with this movie, which is how they portray Taka and
the love story.
How they portray Taka and Nathan's relationship, because I really do actually like how their relationship is played out, in that they never really say much to each other, because I think from Taka's perspective, what we get is a lot of her trying to deal with the fact that there is at the beginning, a man that killed her husband is who she has to look after, but then slowly she, like, realizes that there's some respect there. What I don't like is that it's reduced to a love story.
Yeah, I agree. I feel the love story is massively contrived.
Yes, because I think there's more. When it becomes a love story, it becomes her voice, not like literal voice. Her narrative voice becomes reduced to her relationship with Nathan. And it already was to some extent, but there was more there because she's, like, trying to deal with her two sons who have a relationship with Nathan. By the end, I mean, her two sons have a relationship with Nathan. Nobutada, her nephew, who is clearly close because you can see he spends a lot of time in that house as opposed to living with Katsumoto. Like, her entire relationship with her brother, Katsumoto, is now currently strained because he is basically telling her to live with the man who killed her husband. The scene where Nathan is fighting with Yujiro.
Okay. Yeah,
so Yujiro
is that, like, one where they're having the wooden sword?
Yeah, the wooden sword fight, and Nathan keeps getting his ass kicked.
Yeah.
That scene, Yujiro is that whole scene is like, and you can see a lot of people in the village are watching, and Taka's watching, and she's basically seeing this dude who is responsible for the death of her husband get his ass beat. Now, he does get back up, and I think she sees that, but a lot of the emotionality in the way that she is portrayed, which I did think came across, is about how she views this person who, like, especially in that instance, is kind of pathetic and was responsible for killing her husband. Like, how did this guy manage to kill...
Right. Yeah. Actually, that's a good point.
But also, he keeps getting up, so we can see, like, oh, there's something there. But also, he keeps getting his ass beat.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's an interesting. Yeah, actually, I didn't I didn't make that connection watching it, but I think you're right, because there is that element of it too. Like, how did he possibly kill my husband? But I do feel like the love story is kind of unnecessary, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think it would have been much more interesting to have actually had more scenes with her struggling with this.
Yeah, I agree.
Because one of my other issues with the movie, and to me this is a really, really big pitfall, is I don't think it's properly justified getting Tom Cruise to the village.
I fixed that.
Okay, because I think that to me is a really big problem.
Well, they sort of do that when they show like the meditation scene at the beginning when Katsumoto's meditating, and he like has visions of the tiger, and then the flag that Nathan is like fighting off the other enemies has like the white tiger on it, and I was like, I get the symbolism, but also does samurai really meditate like that? Like, how much of this is real? How much of this is like Katsumoto's vision? It's like,
no, exactly. And then because there's a scene later where she's like, "Why is he alive?" And he basically says like, "Oh, he says something to the effect of like, oh, it's meant to be." Like he speaks in some sort of cosmic sense, and I'm like, no, you fucking let him live and brought him back to your village. Why did you do that?
Yeah,
like. And
I think I fixed that on my pitch. So
okay, yeah, because I felt that was a really, really big issue. Yeah,
I do have one. Just sticking with Taka before we move on. I also think like I want more scenes with her because she's our only view into the female view of samurai life,
right?
And so when we have her, her relationship with Nathan romanticized, it becomes a reduction of her voice, I feel like. In terms of now she's defined by her relationship with him when she shouldn't be.
No, exactly.
And so I feel like if we have, I mean, I think I fixed that in my pitch as well, but when we have a relationship that is defined more by, and see her in the village, like what do women do in the village? At one point in time, Nathan comes over and he's like, "Oh, let me help with that." And she's like, "Japanese men don't do that." And he's like, "Well, I'm not Japanese." And it's a good line. It's a good line. I like that line. But also it's like, what do Japanese women do?
Right.
In a samurai village? I'm curious.
Yeah.
Because clearly they don't have as much power or anything as the men. But like, what do Japanese women do?
Well, and that's what I mean, like going back to this whole idea of it's a romanticized culture. It's obviously like there's obviously a patriarchy at play as well in this, at least in how it's portrayed here. And that's never really addressed. Yeah. And I get, like, you're not going to in a 2.5... I mean, it's also really fucking long, but in a 2 hour
I never feel that way about this movie. I love watching this movie.
Well, the thing is, I don't think it's a terrible movie. I actually, like, I made a list of things that I think it's actually beautifully shot. Yeah. There's a lot of great imagery.
It's all shot in New Zealand.
I know, which was funny. I did read that. I thought that was pretty interesting. But it was believable. I thought Ken Watanabe was great. The music is amazing.
What could I say about Hans Zimmer?
It's like
Hans Zimmer kills it.
He does. I mean, it's so funny because there's one scene where it's like the music started playing where it's like, oh, this sounds a lot like Dark Knight, and then I was like, oh yeah, it's Hans Zimmer, which is so funny because he actually uses the same chord progression a lot.
It's a good chord progression,
but he makes it, I don't know, it's always cool. Like it's always just, I don't care. It just sounds amazing.
Yeah.
There were some great sequences, and the one that I mentioned specifically was the one where he's having dinner with them. I thought there was a lot of tension in that scene,
but it's so intimate too. Great scene.
Yeah, exactly. My thing. So as I was watching the movie, I think I was having a bit of a hard time trying to pinpoint what thematically, like it's a movie. It's about traditional versus modern values, I think, but there are so many other movies about like capitalism and kind of the westernization of Japan that are way better. And I'm just like, basically, I was like, there are so many Kurosawa movies that are way better. Like, it's basically, and I know you can't compare it. Like, Kurosawa is like the man. I mean, he
is the Japanese filmmaker, unless we're talking animation.
Yeah, exactly. But I also put, Ozu's Tokyo Story also talks a bit about like traditional versus modern. And so these themes have been explored a lot in Japanese cinema in way more interesting ways. Now, it's unfair to compare anything to Kurosawa because, like I said, I mean, he's pretty much the man when it comes to like samurai movies.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy who made Seven Samurai. I mean, that's it, right?
He also did Rashomon, didn't he?
He did Rashomon, Seven Samurai.
And Rashomon and Seven Samurai are like not just two pieces of Japanese cinema that are like excellent. Those are like, and I'm not saying that Japanese cinema is lesser. I'm saying like Rashomon and Seven Samurai are two pieces of cinema, period.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's like global cinema. Yeah. They are essential films that you have to see. For good reason. I mean, they are excellent movies. But then there's other movies that he did in his career, like High and Low, which also is about capitalism in Japan, like sort of like a post-imperial, the capitalization post-World War II era of Japan. Because you see that a lot in Kurosawa films. He actually deals a lot with class, especially in The Lower Depths is all about class. The Bad Sleep Well is also about that. Akuru as well. So that's a big...
I really like the way Kurosawa does like... he like did Seven Samurai, and then like Western cinema started, noticing what was happening in Japanese film, and so we have we have Kurosawa making samurai films, which then influenced westerns, which then influenced Kurosawa and his samurai films. Like it's neat to see that kind of.
There was a back and forth.
Yeah, really, truly, yeah.
A very interesting back and forth because he influenced John Ford a lot, and then John Ford also ended up influencing Kurosawa.
Yeah.
But Kurosawa, like, and then actually even more recently, this was done again. So there was the Clint Eastwood Western Unforgiven, which was then later, there was a samurai adaptation made of that film with Ken Watanabe. That's amazing. It's an amazing film. But anyway, in terms of like theme, I felt like that concept had been explored in other movies just better. So I had a hard time thinking, like, why did you have to tell this story through the lens of a white guy?
Yeah.
I just felt it was hard to justify that. What were my other notes? Yeah, I didn't get why Ken Watanabe spared him. A little heavy-handed. Yeah, there were just some things where I just felt like it was a little contrived, and I felt like if you were to get Slavoj Žižek to talk about this movie, he'd talk about I
love Slavoj Žižek.
He'd go on this whole tirade about like, oh, it's this like, it's capitalism, how it's explored in... Yeah. He probably... there's probably a monologue somewhere on the internet where he talks about this movie.
Yeah. Well, but maybe the ideology... Like, this is not what we're talking about.
Yeah, but the ideology, basically, and how it's just this, like, oh, capitalism bad... Traditional values good, but it's never really. It's not the nuance. It's
way more
missing.
Nuanced. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah, there's a lot of things about this movie. I do think that the whole idea of having someone who was hired to kill Native Americans, savages at the time, obviously not the way it is now, Native Americans, is and then having them like come in to defeat the samurai. I do think that there is a certain amount of respect there that Nathan has for both the samurai and the... Like, I think it could work. I wonder. But I do want to say, like, as much as we've been shitting on this movie, I shit on this movie because I love it. Because it's so close to, I think, really being actually a really great movie. There's just, like, some of the big things we've been talking about. But I do want to talk about my goods, unless you have any.
No, that's it. I mean, that's my whole list of everything.
I do want to say some goods because I always love Billy Connolly.
Oh yeah,
any line Billy Connolly says is great. I think Tom Cruise's performance in this movie is quite good.
I think it's okay.
I don't think it's his best, but it's believable.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Yeah, I think Ken Watanabe's performance is outstanding.
Yeah, I would agree.
He's great in everything he does, but he is really good. I do like that it's all shot in New Zealand, and that it's not actually Mount Fuji; it's Mount Taranaki.
You're right. Film. Yeah, which has has a striking resemblance to Mount Fuji.
Yeah. So apparently, because what I didn't understand was when they were making The Hobbit, they used Mount Cook as the Misty Mountain,
as the Lonely Mountain.
Yeah.
And
I never understood because Mount Taranaki has a lake right at the bottom of it, and it looks like what I imagined the Misty Mountain would look like, the Lonely Mountain.
Oh, Erebor, yeah, the Lonely Mountain.
Yeah. Oh, not the Misty Mountain, the Erebor. Yeah, it looks like, but I think the reason they didn't do that is because it looks too much like Mount Fuji.
Mount Fuji. Ah.
And I think they wanted it to look more conical and less flat.
Yeah, because the as it's described in the book, it has more of it has a peak.
Yeah, it's like a tall peak. Yeah. Hans Zimmer is killing it with that soundtrack. Yeah, I just wanted to I love the way they depict samurai. I know it is kind of probably romanticized a little bit, but I like the whole point when they're in the village, and I really think I tried to fix it in my pitch, so I'll talk about it, but I really think the strengths of this movie are when we're exploring samurai life through Nathan's eyes, but it still has to be Katsumoto's story. I'll talk about it when I get to my pitch, but I just really wanted to say I really like this movie. I know it has its problems, but I really like this movie.
Okay. I was just, as you were talking, I was also just thinking there's another great samurai film, Harakiri, which came out in 1962, which is by Masaki Kobayashi, which is also it deals with that whole concept of honor, and told it's a story about samurais in feudal Japan.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd throw in another random movie recommendation.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to echo, it's not a bad movie. It's kind of like Dances with Wolves, but with samurai.
Oh my god, that's exactly what it is.
This is basically what it is. It's just Dances with Wolves.
It's just Dances with Samurai.
Yeah, Dances with Samurai. There you go. Samurai. Yeah.
Oh man, that's funny. It's true. It's Dances with Samurai, except we get to see Tom Cruise instead of Kevin Costner's butt.
Yeah, there you go.
Do you remember Miss McMurtry had to fast forward through that part because she wouldn't let us look at Kevin Costner's butt?
Yeah, we weren't allowed to see Kevin Costner's butt. I mean, which is fine. I'm cool with that.
I don't really want to see his butt either, but it was just weird. That, I think the act of fast forwarding through it to a bunch of grade 6s pointed it out more rather than... Yeah,
exactly. It's so funny how something you turn something into a taboo and then suddenly it's
the Streisand
all
effect.
The more... Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I think it's pitch time. You or me?
All right.
You said you had a pretty good one, so maybe I'll go.
Okay,
first.
I think mine's decent in the sense that it's a story, and I think it's a movie I would prefer over the one we saw. I don't think it's amazing, but I think it's good. Structurally, it's got the pieces.
I tried to keep mine fairly similar while fixing some of the stupid things without changing the movie too much.
Okay, mine's quite mine's a bit different from the movie, I'll say.
Who went first last time? I think you went first last time.
I think I did.
So I'll go first this time.
Okay.
All right. So my movie basically starts with two main characters because I want there to be two main characters because I think that just works better. So we get a voiceover for Mr. Graham, that's Nathan Spaulding, or Peter Pettigrew. And
Timothy Spall.
Timothy, yeah, not is it? Yeah. What did I say?
You said Nathan Spaulding.
Oh, I must have meant Nathan Algren. Timothy Spaulding.
Yeah.
It's
so good.
So we see Katsumoto is getting ready for war while this voiceover is happening about the samurai, and then we see Katsumoto ride out to ride before his army, and he meets with an opposing leader. The two of them talk as if they know each other, and Katsumoto says he does not think getting rid of the old ways is the right thing to do, and they can't seem to come to an agreement. So there's a short battle, and the samurai win, and they block off the railroad. So we flip to Captain Algren is on a boat. Nathan Algren on his way.
I just want to interject for a quick. Yeah. So that's the event that's actually described. They talk about that happening in the movie, but it happens off screen.
Yeah, I want it to happen on screen. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, but it's the same one they talk about.
Yeah.
In the okay, got it.
So then we flip to Captain Algren. He's already on the boat on his way to Japan, but he's basically wasted. And he says, Billy Connolly says, he explains that Nathan's methods for observing the opponent and understanding the enemy was crucial in the defeat of the Cheyenne and the Blackfoot, and so that's why he's been hired. and he's not actually. We're basically told he's not actually a great soldier, but he's a great strategist.
Ah, okay.
Right, and he's really particularly good at is knowing his enemy.
Got it.
So we see Nathan have a flashback to a troop killing one of the tribes, the aforementioned tribes. So the movie from Nathan's side plays out mostly the same way. So with him like training the men from that point on, but we don't need that intro. That's why I got rid of it. So he's training the men and going through that way.
Okay.
So that's sort of happening, but we're intercutting that training series of events and we are introduced to Omura as well as they get off the boat, and he's like training with them. But on Katsumoto's side, we see him go to Tokyo, and he meets with the Emperor, and Mr. Omura's there, and the Emperor he's like, I don't think we should get rid of this. I've said it over and over again. I don't think we should get rid of our traditional ways. I don't understand why we're doing this. And he's like, but Mr. Omura, the Emperor is like, I don't know what to do. Like, I think we should westernize, but I hear you because you're my teacher. But I don't know what to do. But Mr. Omura is furious that his railway is blocked off. So Katsumoto says, I will gladly remove my men when my voice is heard at the council again. So he's been removed from the council.
Oh,
and Katsumoto's like, I can't let you do that, Katsumoto, because you didn't remove your sword last time. If you don't follow the rules of the council, you can't be on the council. And Katsumoto's like, if I follow the rules of the council, then I've already lost. Right? Then I'm already playing by your rules instead of playing by... Like, I'm not saying that my rules are perfect, the rules that we had before, but I am saying that if I already have to concede my swords, if I already can't wear my top knot, then I've already lost. What am I fighting for if I'm not...
Right.
If the council won't let me have my own ideas, right?
Interesting.
If the council says that this, and this are not okay, how can I argue for those things when I can't do them in the council? And so Katsumoto and Omura are basically at odds, and he leaves. And Omura says, we've hired Nathan Algren, a great American strategist, to defeat the samurai. And Katsumoto is like, well, I look forward to the battle. And he actually goes out of his way and finds the book that Nathan wrote on the Cheyenne and the Blackfoot. So it's like a published book, and he finds it in the Japanese library. It's written in English. Or maybe he goes out to to a market and buys it. But he goes out of his way to get this book and so he finds it, and then he leaves to prepare for this battle that Omura, he knows is coming with Omura. Nathan, so the battle plays out the same way, except now we know that the battle was happening. So Omura is like, we're going to go battle Katsumoto on the outskirts of Tokyo, just outside Tokyo, and Nathan gets captured the same way. But instead of the whole vision thing, Katsumoto is like, kill him, and Nathan reacts faster and winds up killing the red armored samurai in the same fashion, which surprises Katsumoto. He's like, oh damn, like that was pretty fine. And so he goes and he says, you're not a coward, you fight with honor. Before I kill you, I would like to know your name. And Nathan says, my name is Nathan Algren. And Katsumoto goes, oh, like that Nathan Algren?
Oh, interesting.
And so instead of killing him, like right before he kills him, he goes, oh, okay. And he's like, and he tells the samurai to take him with him to his village. And then we see Nathan watch as Katsumoto murders the other general. The way that so Nathan, we see like that's the way he was going to be murdered. Mm-hmm. But then Katsumoto murders the general
because
that
he
way.
recognized his name. Got it. Interesting.
So the movie can play out much the same way, but the focus is more on Katsumoto and Nathan's conversations. They constantly talk about their good conversations, so I wanted to focus on it more as a means of both their friendship, but also as a means of showing how you can be friends with somebody who is inherently paradoxical. Mm-hmm. So he also is like, I'm going to take this opportunity to like learn the samurai way, because I think Nathan is like, he's not a great soldier, he is a good strategist, but he is first and foremost is an anthropologist. It's just they didn't have a word for it.
Oh, right. So, but he is interesting. Right.
So because so Katsumoto has the same thoughts at first, and so they're both trying to learn about their enemy, essentially. That's why Katsumoto spared him.
Right.
So when Nathan realizes that he won't be able to leave, he decides to make the most of his time there. He begins to learn the language and the customs, and despite himself, he finds himself like actually enjoying getting to know the people. Katsumoto and his son Nobutada are impressed with Nathan, as he seems to have a knack for languages. So they're impressed with like his ability to pick them up. Nathan begins to sober up, much to his chagrin. He doesn't like it, but And Katsumoto basically demands that he sober up and the two of them have genuine conversation. So while Nathan resents this, he's slowly learning what the samurai and who the samurai are, and he's starting to like also participate a little bit. So at one of their conversations, Katsumoto asks Nathan why he's troubled and about the writings in his journal and about the book he wrote. And Nathan reveals that he spent time when he was in the army. He was posted at an outpost that was near to a tribe of Native Americans, or what they're calling savages, but I'm not going to call them that. He learned some of the language because it was beneficial to where he was posted. He built up a rapport with a few of the locals, and he even got close to some of them to the point where he called them friends. We can do all this in flashback as well. Mm-hmm. But when the order came out to basically wipe out the savages, Nathan was like, I don't want to do that. This village in particular was not part of the other attacks, but he's basically like, okay, you can dissent, and your options are either dissent and be tried for treason, court-martialed, and likely hung, or you can use your knowledge and strategy and show us how to kill them. And Nathan chooses the former, or the latter.
Oh,
so he chooses. And so that's why he's like, has PTSD. He chose that. And so Katsumoto listens and explains. He says, I have regrets over killing some of the other samurai, like the friend, like general you saw me kill. Mm-hmm. He was my friend, and he was respected, but he lost, and it was my honor to murder him, even though he was my friend. It's my honor to help him end his life. Mm-hmm. Nathan is surprised to find out that a lot of the generals that he was training and that Katsumoto was fighting against are former samurai or are samurai.
Right. No, like that, and then they actually know each other.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah. Okay, interesting.
So that happens. So Tako goes to Katsumoto, and we have that scene where she's all like, why is he in my house? And it's a shame, but Katsumoto is like, you'll bear it. I need to learn from Nathan, because just as Nathan says in his book, you need to know your enemy. I am going to use Nathan to know my enemy.
Right.
And so Taka believes that Nathan was defeated and should have his life taken the same way that her husband was defeated. Right? But Katsumoto is like, no, this is... Like, he's like, I hear what you're saying, but the keeping Nathan alive is more important to what we're trying to do here, what I'm trying to do here, than just the honor. It's about keeping our tradition about the whole of samurai, not just your husband, unfortunately. So Nathan is surprised to find that he is genuinely interested in the samurai culture. Now that he's sort of sobered up a little bit more, and he's talked with Katsumoto about what's happening. He's never talked about it before. He's sort of all of a sudden like starting to feel like he's resting a bit easier, because through the act of talking, through the act of learning about meditation and stuff like that, he feels like he's resting a bit more. So it's not just because he's sober. It's more because he's basically therapy, except not. Mm-hmm. But so at this point he asks Taka to show him how to dress, how to like put on a yukata or a kimono. Those are two different kinds of dresses. I don't know which one is which, but anyway. So he asks how to put on those, and he asks if, is there anything that I can do to help? But his language skills aren't great, so he doesn't really understand her, and she's just impatient with him for obvious reasons. And so she just tells him to like leave her alone, and he carries on with her chores, and we can see her that she's like deeply affected by this and doesn't understand how this man who defeated her husband is living in her house. And obviously at this point Nathan doesn't understand. So Nathan starts to create a relationship with Taka's two sons, and they teach him words and how they're training to be samurai, how like the kids do it. So finally Nathan asks Katsumoto about the samurai in the red armor, and he finds out that this is Taka's husband, and Nathan is like, oh shit, I didn't know that.
You're right.
And I've been living in this house. And so Nathan struggles with the concept of how the samurai view death. Right? He's like, they're like, I killed that man. Why am I living in this house, or why am I alive? Or like the way you killed the general. And he's like, it was a good death. Like it was the samurai's duty to serve. He fought in battle, and that is a good death. And Nathan's like, no death is a good death. Like you don't want to die, because that's a very Western way to view death, right? Mm-hmm. Versus the samurai. And so they can't really seem to reach an understanding that way. He goes back to Taka and tries to apologize for killing, but Taka explains like it's culturally different. That the duty of, as both of them as soldiers, as warriors, is what they were doing. And despite herself, she finds she can't hate Nathan now that her sons have gotten to know him, and the fact that he like apologized. So there really is a divide. Like she's like, this was my husband's duty, and he died doing his duty, and that was his honor to do. But also, I'm really sad that he's dead, and you killed him. And Nathan is like, I don't understand how you people can view death this way. Like no death is a good death, but that's the way he views it growing up in a Judeo-Christian society. So there's the assassination attempt happens the same on Katsumoto, and we're surprised. Nathan is just as surprised as anyone to find that what he's learned helps him protect Taka and her sons through the training that he started to use, but also just the fact that he's a soldier. And so he's like, wow, this is pretty crazy. And so the two of them are like, we can see that Katsumoto and Nathan are actually, their conversations, we can see their walls are breaking down. And so Nathan asks Katsumoto, like, what is this all about? Why are people trying to murder you? And Katsumoto explains, like, Westernization is not a bad thing, but the selling out of what makes Japan unique, its history, its tradition, the wearing of top knots, this is all becoming illegal. And what I fear is that other nations are trying to create influence and basically using that to destroy Japan or use Japan as a tool. We're whoring ourselves out to these other countries. I think it's close to the line he uses in the actual movie. So like this is all happening all over. And then he's like, and then there are people like Mr. Romura who are benefiting from this. They're becoming wealthy themselves without helping the people of Japan. So Japan as a country is in danger, but I feel like the people. So Nathan's like, wow, I agree with that, but I don't agree with how you are refusing to use firearms. And also you believe that like samurai should still have power and there's still a class. So Nathan believes in the ideas of the American Constitution. All men are created equal. Katsumoto points out, like, so Nathan's like, all men are equal. That's why we have the American Constitution. And Katsumoto is like, except for the red men and the black men. And I wonder if there were samurai in America, if they would be treated equal too. So like they're both pointing out, what I want is them both to point out like the flaws in each other's ideologies.
The ironies that exist.
Yeah. In each other's, like, not that one is better, but just, and that both of them firmly believe in what they believe and they can still be friends.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So then we return to Tokyo in the spring, and the movie plays out the same way, except Nathan refuses to go back to work for the Japanese Imperial Army. He finds himself thinking of his time with the Japanese, and he decides, he's like, I think actually I want to go back. And so he's like, I'm going to go find Katsumoto and ask if I can go back, but he finds out that Katsumoto has been arrested. So they rescue it, but Nobutada doesn't die. Instead, the samurai Nathan called Bob dies. And Nathan, and he tells Nathan in Japanese, like, you need to protect Katsumoto. And so Nathan sort of begins to understand that there is this deep connection, deep understanding of tradition. So back at the village, Nathan is like, we should use firearms. We can get firearms and we could cause more damage. We could defend ourselves. But Katsumoto is like, no. At first I was against using firearms, but now if I want to get firearms, it means we'll probably have to go through the systems that are creating a more westernized Japan that I am trying to disagree with. We'd have to go through the Winchester Company or any of these companies that are already, raping Japanese tradition and Japanese people. So he's like, no, again, on principle, I'm against this now. Cool. So before the battle, we get Taka and Nathan. Taka basically is like, I think you should wear my husband's armor. And he's like, wow, like, are you sure? And she's like, yeah, because now you are one with our family. You came back, you stay with us. And even though you are my husband's killer, my children and myself and my nephew, all, like, you have become part of our lives now. And so I think the two of them have this moment of, like, more like sibling understanding, where he explains, like, I'm not sure how great I'll be able to do in this battle because I really have only been training with the samurai for like a couple months, which is not much, but it's like I do feel like I want to help this village. I feel like you saved me more than I could ever repay. Like, I found a true sense of home that I haven't felt. And so I really wanted to give them a moment, but it had to be non-romantic. Mm-hmm. So then the battle plays out more with Nathan giving strategy rather than actually fighting, because he knows all about the enemy, and also like he knows nothing about being a samurai. He's been there for a couple months, so maybe he's like he can do a couple. I did say like maybe it'd be cool if we have one moment where he fights like a samurai, and that'd be really cool. But it's not like he's not there because he's a good samurai. He's there because he knows the enemy strategies and he knows how to help Katsumoto. So the battle plays out the same way. Katsumoto dies. So in this, an injured Nobutada, Katsumoto's son, shows up and presents the sword to the emperor. Right? And we get that whole scene play out, but it's Nobutada who is presenting the sword. As he gets up to leave and he turns, we see that one of the people who is waiting for him, one of the other samurai who came with Nobutada, is Nathan.
Oh, interesting.
So Nathan is there, and Nobutada admits to Nathan, he's like, I don't know how I will continue these traditions. I don't know how to do this. I feel like I need to do what my father died to protect. And Nathan says, I think that's a pretty good ideal, and then asks if he can return with Nobutada.
Okay.
And that's the end of the movie.
Nice.
Yeah. Again, I tried this. I feel like, I don't know if this is better. I still like the story we got, because I really think the dichotomy between looking at how the Native Americans were viewed as savages and now the samurai are being viewed as outdated is the same. I think there is a parallel there that really actually does work. I just think it has to be told better.
Yeah. Well, I think I think the emphasis on discussing the ideas more and the contradictions that exist within them, and sort of there's almost like a deconstructionist approach to the narratives that they've each built their beliefs on.
Yeah.
Which I actually think is, I mean, that's something I just find much more interesting, and I actually think lends itself better to this story. Because the thing is, with the movie in its current form, there's a lot of that I think is lacking that's actually really necessary. Because I think to really explore that conflict of values, you have to actually get into some of that detail, which I think you've managed to do in your pitch.
Well, that's
Plus,
why
also, I like that you removed the love story aspect of it.
I also wanted to
didn't work.
Cut off some of the fat. I do think that the intro, the more time we spend with just Nathan, the less time we spend with Katsumoto. And I do think, like I said, I think the parallelism works between the Native Americans and the samurai, but I do think that the story needs to be Katsumoto's story.
I think so too. Yeah,
and I think you use Tom Cruise's character as a means of exploring that story, and by being like, especially for Western audiences, by being like, hey, here's an American with American values, freedom, liberty, all men are equal, and then Katsumoto, who believes in the samurai way, power, some of the politics, tradition, and then sort of be like, these two are compatible, but also not compatible. The two of them can be friends, and Katsumoto can be like, I think power in the hands of the samurai is a good thing. We provide for our villages, we provide for our families, we provide for the people who live under us as a samurai lord. Whereas Nathan is like, all people are equal, except And if you have people who are ruling over, you don't have true freedom. So he points out the flaws in Katsumoto's system, but Katsumoto is like, yeah, but not all people are equal. The black men, the red man,
Yeah, the way you've constructed your own society does not live up to those values that you profess.
Yeah, and if we wanted to get real, wanted to go a step further, we could even, I don't think Katsumoto would say this necessarily because I don't think he would agree, but women. Neither society is particularly feminist. Particularly at that point.
Right. Well, that is the irony of the, American ethos of like freedom, and then yet it's not for everybody.
No.
Freedom for some. You hold this as this as this standard, as if it's a given, but the reality, I mean, even this has become much more apparent, or it's definitely dominated the news sphere in the last week. There's a large contingent of Americans who do not get to experience the same freedoms because of their skin color. And that's the sad reality of
the American
and it's not just
lie.
America; it's Canada too. It's the Western world. It's the world as a whole.
Well, I do want to say, like, yeah, we definitely, there is racism in Canada. There is racism in every part of the world, obviously. But I just want to say, like, that's why I say it's the American lie. The American dream, quote unquote, has been propagated that it's for everyone when it's really not. That's why I say it's the American lie, and I think that's been a detriment because we're starting to see the cracks in that lie. We're starting to see the truth of that lie, that it is a lie, and that those of color, those are racialized. Those who are racialized do not have the same freedom. Freedom for some, not freedom for all. Yeah. I want to hear your pitch.
All right, mine's. One of the things I realized in writing it is to really have done a proper job, I would have had to do some research on specifics. So I'm going to admit there are some parts that are a little generalized, I suppose, which is not what I would have liked to do ideally. However, I got the structure of it at least. So basically, my movie is basically the same movie, but I've just substituted Tom Cruise for a Japanese officer.
Oh, tight.
And my reason for doing that was just because I actually just felt it'd be a far more interesting movie to have a Japanese character caught in the middle of this modernization, this phase of modernization, and them wrestling with it. I just also felt it was much more justified too as a story, because I questioned the whole, like, bringing Tom Cruise to Japan. It just felt very contrived to me. And so to me, the solution was just have it all in Japan. Now the Americans do show up and the Americans do start getting involved. So there's that element to it, but it's from the perspective of a character. I've called him Hiro, Hiro.
Yeah.
And so he's telling the story. It starts off with voiceover and him narrating, like, this is how the samurai died. This is a story of the last samurai and how they came to an end. So he's an officer in the army, and they've started collaborating with the American military, getting American weapons, and he's high enough up that he has some authority, and he's been pushing for modernization. He's like, because around the same time, if I'm not mistaken, Japan and Korea were also at war, or they were going to go to war.
I don't know. I'd have to look it up, but I do know that, like, Japan in the late 1800s and early 1900s did occupy Korea.
Yeah. So he's thinking about this, like, we have to modernize because the other countries are going to as well. And in order for us to defend ourselves properly, this is what we need to do. And he's hearing wind of this Katsumoto and his basically a group of rogue warriors who basically are in opposition to this and have basically been engaging in, like, these sabotage skirmishes to try and sabotage the efforts of modernization, attacking trains and things like that. And so it's become enough of a problem that he is sent with his soldiers. He's got a trained army, and they're sent to go fight this group of rogue soldiers, basically. And in the battle, and in the way this battle plays out, his soldiers are actually trained at this point, and they have weapons, and they win the battle, but he sees... It's kind of like the scene at the end of the movie where they see how easily the samurai are defeated, and they're like, oh, like, we just killed all these people. Like, in the movie, it's played like, oh, we're watching this way of life die. In this, it's him, he's watching the loss of life, and he's going, okay, now that I see these weapons and what a bullet does to human skin, I'm now like, what, like, this is a whole new kind of warfare. And he is now thinking of, like, the greater implications of this.
Yeah.
Of, like, that we are now, like, we've just slaughtered a whole bunch of these people. And so, like, he comes back and he's talking with somebody else, and they're like, he's bothered by it, and they're going, like, what's wrong? He's like, I just wasn't expecting, like, we just mercilessly slaughtered all these people. And so he's sort of grappling with this, like, this disconnect in terms of how fighting is now conducted. And in my mind, he's a little bit older and quite possibly like had been trained in a more traditional method of fighting.
I think that comes across already.
Yeah, okay, good. So anyway, there's another skirmish. This time, however, he's caught off guard and he's ambushed. And in my version, they take him basically as a prisoner of war with the idea of interrogating him to learn more, because they know he's a high up general, and they're gonna like, we want to get information from you, like what's the strategy, what are their plans. He ends up spending time in this village, and it plays out, I don't know if it would play out more or less the same way, but he ends up not at one point I had the idea that like maybe he wants to commit harakiri, but or he's like, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. But then they tell him like, no, actually, like, live with us, like actually stay with us. And he actually lives with the people in this village, and he gets to know them. And it's not so much he learns how to become. He maybe learns a little bit of. He trains with some of the samurai for a bit, but he spends time with Katsumoto, and through their conversations and talking about this modernization versus traditional values. And he asked Katsumoto, like, why is it, like, what is it that you're against? And they bond over this, like, Hiro says, like, I saw, when we fought this battle, I just saw the way in which these, like, bullets, like, just tore through people. And Katsumoto says, I'm not against modernization necessarily, but the same thing happened to me. I saw what weapons were what these weapons are capable of doing, and I just kept thinking about where this would lead, and what would happen if it just kept going, and someday someone created a weapon that was so powerful enough it could destroy an entire city.
That's good.
So yeah, okay. So you got okay, yeah. Perfect. So that's how they connect. Anyway. He spends time with learning. He spends time with Katsumoto, and then eventually they let him go, as long as he he says like, I'm not going to tell them where you are. The story is I was kidnapped and I was held hostage and I don't know anything. And so they actually they return him like as if he was a hostage to try and play along with it. Anyway, he goes back and they try to get him to tell what did you see? What did you find out? Like, where are they? Where are they hiding? And eventually they're able to, one of the guys trips him up and is able to figure out oh no, but you actually do know something. And when Hiro's figured out, he ends up trying to plead with them not to kill Katsumoto. He's like, look, I think there's a way to resolve this that doesn't involve violence. And I think there's a way to resolve this where we're not going to kill anybody. And so he talks to the emperor, and the emperor agrees with him and goes, okay, so they send an emissary to Hiro with the intention of talking about it. However, this is all a trick.
Yeah.
And the emissary was actually sent to find out where Katsumoto was, and it's actually, then basically an army shows up, and they completely demolish Katsumoto's forces. And Hiro is actually being basically roped into this, and he's witnessed this entire battle. And so in this battle, it's basically the same thing. Katsumoto's army is destroyed, but at the very end of it, Katsumoto is still alive, and he basically asks Hiro to, he says, I'm going to commit harakiri, can you chop my head off? And so then the story comes full circle, and Hiro says, and this is how the last samurai died. I killed him.
Oh, wow.
And then that's the end of the movie.
Yeah, I like that. I do think that you're right. You do chop off a lot of fat from the movie when you remove, the American kind of... Because you can already have their influence without having it be from an American point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think you do trim a lot of that, that sort of baggage away. And what I try to do is, make that baggage more present by outlining their philosophies. And I also think the conversations that they keep referencing are important. I like that. But I think what you've done is basically be okay, let's make a better story about what goes on there. And I do think, what you're talking about in terms of structure and how you would have liked to do more history, I do think the structure is there, and I think your history would have, the history would have added to what Katsumoto's feelings about things were. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
I like the idea of seeing these new weapons and being like, oh, holy shit, like this isn't warfare anymore. This is a slaughter.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
if the enemy is also westernizing and has these kinds of weapons, like what are we going to do to each other? Like what does war become? It's not like, and as it's no longer about two people fighting each other with the skill of their training and the respect and the honor, but it becomes two faceless armies firing bullets of mass destruction. And eventually, what if they come up with a thing that can just wipe out a whole army or a whole city in one go?
Exactly. Yeah. And then the allusion to what eventually would happen with Hiroshima.
Exactly.
So, and I'm thinking there's I think because as I was thinking, talking about it, I think these themes are in Kagemusha, which is a Kurosawa film. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I seem to remember there being a theme of like, because
Did you accidentally just write a Kurosawa film?
Well, in my mind, I was like, what would be something I'd want to watch? Okay, well, I'd want to watch a Kurosawa movie. Okay, well, what would be the 1800s in this period? What would that look like?
Yeah.
How would that be done? And so it was certainly, it was. I mean, if you haven't figured out, I love Kurosawa.
Yeah, there's no reason not to.
He's one of my all-time favorite filmmakers.
Yeah.
But yeah, Japanese cinema throughout my life has actually been. Going back, the earliest influence for me would have been Hayao Miyazaki.
Yeah.
I love Miyazaki. And that was really kind of what opened... Actually, Miyazaki's films really opened the door to, like, foreign films for me.
Yeah, I think that was for a lot of people, like watching Studio Ghibli movies, or Ghibli or whatever, in Miyazaki has been, like, Spirited Away. A lot of those movies, I think, did open up, particularly Spirited Away in the West. It's not my favorite, but I do think, like, what it really did for foreign cinema was it said, like, animation and anime and foreign cinema, but particularly anime, could also be an art form. Like, this movie is thoughtful enough that it could be an art form. So I think, and around the same time, like, just before Spirited Away, we also had movies like Akira.
Yeah,
right?
Akira, Ghost in the Shell.
And so these were like, and so then we get into, like, as the youth, we get into anime becoming popular with Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon, which are not necessarily like the smartest in terms of, like, Ghost in the Shell or Akira or any Studio Ghibli movie, but what they were was they became popular. It became okay to like anime.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's become more so but it became like foreign films and anime are a form of art just like any other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I would say, like, I think Spirited Away was my first quote unquote foreign film too.
The first one for me that I saw was actually Castle in the Sky, I think.
I love that movie.
That's such a great film.
I like that movie more than I like Spirited Away. And my favorite is still The Secret World of Arrietty.
You know what? That's a good film. My personal favorite Ghibli film, my favorite Miyazaki film is probably Princess Mononoke. Also
a great movie.
But I also really loved his last film, The Wind Rises, was beautiful. Okay. Absolutely beautiful. I also really, it always gets me. Like, even just thinking about it now, I'm getting, like, I'm already starting to... Grave of Fireflies?
Yeah.
What a heavy-hitting movie that is. Oh, my God.
Oh, but even Kiki's Delivery Service.
That's a great film. Oh, that is an amazing film. Really underrated. Like, that is also a spectacular movie. Yeah.
I think basically what we said, if we had to wrap up this entire episode on The Last Samurai, it would be, this movie's aight, but you should probably go watch Kurosawa and Hayao Miyazaki.
Yeah, Miyazaki, Ozu, Kobayashi. There's just so many. Japanese cinema is spectacular. Like, you see some of the best technical filmmaking, especially from that period from, like, the 50s to, like, the 70s.
Yeah.
You see some just really exceptional filmmaking in terms of staging, especially in terms of staging. It's very precise. There's a very precise way in which the scenes are staged, and there's a lot you can learn from watching movies from that era.
Yeah.
I think, and they influenced, heavily, like George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Robert Altman even talks about, like, basically Rashomon being a big influence for him. But
Rashomon narratively and cinematographically,
I don't know if it's a real word, but it's great. Yeah.
Cinematographically both of. I mean, I think my entire pitch for Now You See Me was me being like, it's game theory, but also Rashomon.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's so funny. Anytime you talk about a film where it's retelling something from different perspectives, immediately you use Rashomon.
It's Rashomon. Like I don't even know if Rashomon did it first, but it definitely did the best.
It really is the one that kind of became the standard for how that story is, or like, you know, kind of the level you want to aspire for. So like, this is how it's done well. Yeah. I think my favorite Kurosawa film though is Ron. I still think Ron is my favorite. That's the one that's his adaptation of King Lear.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's just beautiful to look at. Like the photography is exceptional. And it's just amazing.
Yeah. Any last thoughts about The Last Samurai?
No. I really want to go watch a Kurosawa movie right now.
I really want to love this movie, and what I will say is that as a movie, what I think this movie does really well, unintentionally, is it did give us a lot of things to discuss about the way films are made about other cultures.
Yeah.
And I think that was not the intention of this movie, but what this movie does is we had a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Which means I think, like, you know, it's flawed but well done, but it gave us the opportunity. So thanks, Last Samurai.
Yeah, I don't think it's a terrible movie, but
it just has its flaws.
Yeah, there are some things about it where you go, there are some cringy things.
Yeah,
at least
where you're like, ooh, maybe somebody should have thought about that before you went ahead and made this movie. Yeah. Where can people find you?
You can find me on my website, nathanieldraper.com. That's Nathanael, not IEL. Or on Letterboxd at Draper Nate.
Cool. You can find my band Robot Philosopher anywhere you listen to music. YouTube, Bandcamp, Facebook, Spotify. You can also find my other podcast, Audio Mind. Check that one out on all your favorite music things if you want to hear me nerd out and geek out about weird music phenomena. And you can also stick around on this channel. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, share us around, because we have new podcasts coming out every Tuesday on movies. And we also have video essays called This Is a Thing coming out every other Thursday. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Peace.